Brian Herlihy, CEO of Black Rhino. You are focusing on large projects, which makes you relatively unique, on this panel. And we heard this morning about the costs, the development costs involved in, for example, Azura, which was one of the large projects that the continent has seen. How do you go about putting together your partnerships and your financing for developing such large projects, and what are some of your thoughts that you would like to share with other developers? Yep.
Sure. Thank you. I think we discussed earlier, our shareholders force us to a fairly strict ratio of development dollars to investment dollars. So we judge the milestones that we achieve and the amount of risk capital we can spend before achieving those milestones. And if we don't achieve it, it becomes a cliff. We can continue on the project, but we effectively have to freeze spending. We limit it to travel and internal corporate overhead. So that really forces us to walk away from projects sometimes when we can't achieve what's being required. So we've really been searching and engaging with some of the project prep facilities. To us, those are becoming very important because sometimes we can't, not sometimes, a lot of times we can't achieve the milestones and the budgets that we have. So for instance, we're working in Ethiopia with the Development Bank of Southern Africa, and that's been able to expand sort of the horizon of what we've been able to do. And that's been important. This is a regional project, Djibouti and Ethiopia, and there's complexities beyond just the project itself with the cross defaults and the like, and the capacity building in the countries. So to us, the project prep facilities are very welcomed. We probably haven't done enough to understand who the whole 67 project prep facilities are, but I'm sure if my boss heard that there were 67, he'll get me out there looking. But I think the question of where can DFIs come into this earlier. At the end of the day, I said this morning, they are complex projects, but they're not rocket science. The negotiations about allocating the risk, and as countries mature, they would like to see more market risk pushed onto the investor. And as the investor comes into these markets, they're looking for the government to take more risk. I do think there is a role for the DFIs to have a less boxy structure on how the project finance works, and that will require getting involved much earlier, and looking at it. And look, you're seeing it. I think if we just look at the last, sort of 10 years in Africa, right? You had almost a project finance only world in 2005, and then that changed with the onslaught of Chinese bilateral financing. And I would say by like 2011, I actually thought my job was extinct. I just didn't think project finance was going to work anymore because the bilateral financing was just easier for the governments. And if I were in their shoes, I would take it too. But then the debt levels started creeping up again, and you started seeing ratios of 30% to GDP, and project finance started coming back into the fold. But and that brought back the traditional DFI structures. I'm hoping as an investor and a developer, you start to see pressure from the different global DFIs that make people relook at the risk allocation and have DFIs take some greater risk, particularly as countries go through the evolution of building up system operators or strong balance sheet utilities. But that's an iterative process that involves a lot of dialogue back and forth, and we're developing a project on the heels of Azura, and we're really benefiting from that. And the question, the Nigerians will ask is, yes, we took this for Azura, but do we have to take it again? What reward do we get for the second project and the third project? So, those are conversations that need to happen earlier as opposed to later.
Thanks, Brian. Angela, I'll come back to you so that you can bring in the DFI perspective after all the developers have given their perspectives.
Doing business in Africa, you can't afford to be without Africa Investor.